You know, for decades, it feels like we've been stuck in this endless dietary tug-of-war, right? One minute, fat is the ultimate bad guy. The next, it's sugar. Well, it turns out this confusion isn't some new fad. It's actually the result of a massive scientific feud that has literally shaped the way we've been eating for more than 70 years.
So what is the real story here? Is there one single villain we should be pointing our fingers at in our diet? I mean, this is the question that has fueled, I'm talking, countless studies, blockbuster books, and some seriously heated arguments among scientists. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack together in this explainer.
And believe me, when I say fierce, I mean it. This isn't some polite academic debate. As you can see from this quote from Dr. Joel Kahn, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about accusations of negligence, ignorance, even dishonesty. This is a full-blown battle for the truth about our health.
All right, so let's get right into it. To really understand this, we have to go back in time. Picture this. It's the middle of the 20th century, and a terrifying epidemic of heart disease is sweeping across America. People were scared, and scientists were absolutely scrambling to figure out why. And then, one man stepped into the spotlight with a very powerful, very new idea.
And that man was Ancel Keys. Now, he's the person at the absolute center of this whole story. And let's be super clear here. His influence is just undeniable. I mean, even the people who criticized him the most will tell you he is one of the most important figures in the history of nutrition. His work completely changed the game for how we all think about food.
So what was his big idea? It was called the diet-heart hypothesis. And honestly, it was pretty simple and really compelling. The theory went like this. Eating saturated fat, the stuff in meat, butter, eggs, raises your cholesterol. That cholesterol then clogs up your arteries and boom, heart attacks. Simple cause and effect. Okay, so Keys has this huge hypothesis, but now he has to prove it, right? So he launches what was at the time one of the most ambitious research projects ever. This was the study that everyone hoped would finally give them the definitive evidence, the smoking gun they were all desperately looking for.
It was called the 7-Country Study, and wow, it was a massive undertaking. I mean, this thing started way back in 1957. It was the first of its kind, looking at the diets and health of 16 different communities all over the world. We're talking places as different as the US, Finland, and Japan. And it didn't just last a year or two, this thing went on for decades.
And when the results came in, man, it was a bombshell. The data seemed crystal clear. It showed this direct, almost perfect line. The more saturated fat a group of people ate, the more heart disease they had. Simple as that. And that one single finding, it basically became the foundation of all official dietary advice for the next 50 years.
But of course, that's not where the story ends. This is where things start to get really complicated. Because right from the very beginning, not everyone was buying it. Keys' work was immediately met with a ton of skepticism, with people basically accusing him of building this whole groundbreaking study on a totally flawed foundation. And here's what's so fascinating. This whole controversy didn't just pop up years later. Nope, it was there right from the get-go. See, as early as 1953, Keys showed off this really convincing chart using data from 6 countries. But just a few years later, another researcher comes along, a guy named Jacob Yerushalmi, and he says, hey, let's look at 22 countries. And suddenly, that clean picture got a whole lot messier.
And this right here, this slide perfectly shows you the core of the whole argument. Look on the left, that's Keys' data. See that nice, clean, dramatic line? Super persuasive. But then look at the right. When Yerushalmi added in those other countries, that beautiful line just dissolves. It turns into this scattered cloud. And right away, people started asking, wait a minute, are we really getting the whole story here?
So over the years, all these criticisms against Keys and his big study have kind of boiled down to 4 main accusations. Number 1, he cherry-picked the data. 2, he conveniently left out France. 3, his data from Greece was bad. And 4, he completely ignored sugar as a possible culprit.
But hold on, because that's not the end of it. This is a feud, remember? So for every single one of those accusations, Keys' defenders have a counter-argument. In fact, pretty recently, a whole group of experts got together to re-examine all the historical records and basically address these claims one by one.
Okay, so let's tackle the biggest one first, the cherry-picking myth. The claim is that Keys had data from 22 countries, but only used the 7 that fit his theory. Well, his defenders say that's totally mixing up 2 different things. See, the 22-country data was just broad national statistics, not super detailed. The 7-country study, on the other hand, involved intense, in-person fieldwork. And that famous 6-country graph? That was just from a little presentation he gave years before the real study even got started.
All right, next up, what about France?
The story goes that Keyes deliberately excluded France because, they eat a ton of fat but don't get much heart disease. But if you actually look at the historical records, it turns out France was invited to be in the study. They just declined. And get this, the whole idea of the French paradox wasn't even a thing until 1981, way after the study had already begun.
Okay, then you've got the Greek data. The accusation here is that the researchers messed up by surveying people during Lent, when they're fasting from animal products, which would obviously make their saturated fat intake look way lower than it really is. But the researchers fired back, saying, no, that was totally on purpose. Religious fasting is a huge part of their diet for almost half the year, so leaving it out would have actually been bad science. And besides, when they ran the numbers, there wasn't even a big difference between the fasting and non-fasting periods.
So you can see the scientific debate is still raging, even today. But let's take a step back from the science for a second and ask, what actually happened in the real world? Did all this advice, stemming from Keyes' hypothesis, actually make Americans go low-fat? Well, the data tells a story that you might find pretty surprising.
And here it is. This is the big twist. We've all heard the story, right? That the whole low-fat craze is what made us sick. But the data suggests something completely shocking. The truth is, as this quote says so perfectly, America never went on a low-fat diet. Not really.
I mean, just look at the numbers for yourself. After decades of being told to eat less fat, our fat consumption didn't go down at all. It actually went up. In 1970, the average person ate about 147 grams of fat a day. Fast forward to 2010, and that number jumped to almost 190 grams. We weren't eating less fat. We were eating way, way more.
So you're probably asking, okay, if we were eating more fat, but we were told not to, where was it all coming from? And this, my friends, is the absolute key to this whole thing. We did cut back on some fats, like butter and lard from animals, but what did we replace them with? A flood of industrial vegetable oils. Corn oil, soybean oil, all that stuff. And at the exact same time, our consumption of processed foods and added sugar just exploded, to the point where they eventually made up more than 60% of our calories.
So think about that. While the entire public health world was laser-focused on this one thing, saturated fat, our diets were being completely transformed behind the scenes. Our plates were quietly filling up with refined carbs, tons of sugar, and all these new processed vegetable oils. And wouldn't you know it, this massive dietary shift lines up perfectly with the skyrocketing rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here, right? We've got a controversial hypothesis, a huge study, decades of back-and-forth debate, and a really surprising twist about what Americans were actually eating. So the big question is, what does all this mean for you and me right now?
The main takeaway here probably isn't about picking a team, like Team Fat or Team Sugar. It's really about appreciating just how incredibly complex and messy nutrition science can be. This whole history is a perfect example of how one single, powerful idea can completely shape public policy for generations, even when the science behind it is still being fought over.
And that really leaves us with the million-dollar question that researchers are still trying to answer today. When it comes to our health, are we on the right track by hunting for a single villain, whether it's fat or sugar or something else? Or is the real enemy something bigger? Is it the overall pattern of our diet? This huge shift away from real, whole foods and toward a world of ultra-processed products?